All right, today's daf is sponsored for the month by Duvi and Tehila Katra. B'schus Refuah Shlema for Ephraim ben Shifra. We are at the two dots, 14 lines up from the bottom on Mem Aleph Amud Beis 41b, somewhere towards the bottom. Mem Aleph Amud Beis at the two dots. Echad Omer. So one of them says that the event took place on the second day of the month, one says on the third. So we're going to accept that testimony. So ad kama. So we presume that they just weren't aware when Rosh Chodesh was. So how long does that last for? Like, is there?
Can you tell when Rosh Chodesh is by looking at the sun or the moon?
You cannot, because it would be impossible to know whether Beis Din declared Rosh Chodesh or not, right? Just by looking at the moon would not necessarily tell us whether they in fact. Plus, the moon phase is such a minor distinction from one day to the next. It would be difficult to be able to tell from one day just by looking at the moon whether you were on the second day of the month or the third day of the month. So, how many days do we give this guy to figure out when Rosh Chodesh is, right? He's going to go, like, I understand when you're, like, signing your checks and you still write 2024, but at some point, you catch on, right? So, Amar Rav Bar Chanina, Rav Bar Chanina says, Marbasi, Amar Rav Yochanan, Ad Rubosh Chodesh. Once he gets more than halfway through the month, then already people start to catch up. Amar Rava, Rava says, Af Ananami Tanina. We have a Mishnah that says that as well. Echad Omer B'shlosh V'echad Omer Behei. If one says the third day of the month, one says the fifth day of the month. Edutsan Betela, that nullifies their testimony. V'amai. Why should that be? Maybe this guy made the mistake of 2 months of Rosh Chodesh that he was off. So Elalav Mishum Debaruba Yada. So the answer is that length of time, people start to find out. So Liolam Emelach Berubanami Lo Yada Ubeshipura Yada. So even, you might answer that as far as that length of time, he still might not know. Maybe he's just not aware. However, they used to blow the shofar at Rosh Chodesh. So missing one shofar blowing to indicate when Rosh Chodesh was, that can happen. But to miss 2 consecutive months and the guy still doesn't know, that was a custom in order to just let everybody know. It was not because of the mitzvah. So bechad shipura amar detoi, with one shofar blowing, you can make a mistake, but trei shipura lo amar detoi, people not make that kind of mistake. People eventually catch up. V'amar Rav Bar Chanina, Rav Bar Chanina says amar Rav, amar Rabbi Yochanan, ad kamem mevarchem al hachodesh. So how many days into the month can we make a bracha on the new moon? Right, Birchas Levana. Right. Kiddush Levana. That's right. Ad shetismale pigimasa, until its empty space is filled. The kama. How much is that? So Amar Rav Yaakov Bar Idi. Rav Yaakov Bar Idi says Amar Rav Yehuda ad Shiva, until 7 days.
What empty space?
So that's going to be our question.
Right.
Okay. 7 days into the month, we're going to discuss that. Now, I think that it is the Hasidic minhag not to start saying Birchas HaChodesh till 7 days into the month, correct? Right. Many of the non-Hasidic areas will start 3 days into the month.
Right.
It's already 3 days, right?
I thought it was 3, yeah.
So is it 3 or 7 anyway? But this says that you actually end by 7. Omri.
Chabad doesn't do it. The deaf are short. They wait a little longer.
They wait a little longer, right? Till 7.
Yeah.
So Nardai, Omri and Nardai, they said ad Shishasar, until the 16th of the month. V'tarvayu Rabbi Yochanan Svira Lahu. They are both agreeing with what Rabbi Yochanan said as far as filling in the empty space of the moon. He said, well, what does that mean? So it all depends, right? They're going to explain. Ha limahavi ki yasra. The difference is when you're filling in the empty space. Let's say you've got your moon and it looks like this, right? That's your new moon, right? So when it gets to the 7th of the month, so then your moon looks like this. It's half filled in, so the empty space is filled in. You don't have any empty space anymore. It's like a bow that's been drawn back.
Okay, fine.
Right?
So this, like a half moon, was this basically?
Correct. That's fine. By the 7th. The one who holds by the 16th is adding in the whole moon, saying that nothing is missing anymore.
Right.
So that's the 16th. Okay? So both are taking what Rabbi Yochanan says seriously, but they are interpreting it slightly different. Okay. So Amar le Rav Acha mi Difti le Ravina. Rav Acha from Difti said to Ravina, "V'livrei hatov v'hametiv." Okay, let's say you can't say the Birchas HaChodesh after 7 days or so. So then why can't you make the bracha of Hatov Vehametiv, right? Because the moon is getting larger, it's getting brighter. The bracha of Hatov Vehametiv is a bracha that we make when good things are happening, right? We're expressing good things are happening to the people. So Amarle Atu Ki Chaser Mi Mevarchin and Dayanemis. He says, well, what are you suggesting? When the moon is going down, we're going to make a bracha Baruch Dayanemis? Right? It's the parallel, right? To make Baruch Dayanemis, the moon is going away. So the answer to V'lach Tov Metiv Livrachinhu Litzarvayu. He says, okay, fine. So make both brachas. Maybe you're right. Why don't we say Hatov Metiv when the moon is getting bigger and Baruch Dayanemis when the moon is getting smaller? So the answer is Keva Dahainu Urchei L'Mevarchinan, because that is the natural order of things. We don't make such a bracha.
When someone dies?
Well, anytime you hear bad news, right? You can say Baruch Dayanemis on any negative thing, right? Somebody loses a lot of money, you can say Baruch Dayanemis, right? Correct, say Baruch Dayanemis. It doesn't have to be, right? What doesn't have to be death. So theoretically, the moon getting smaller is also not a good thing, but nevertheless, it's a natural occurrence and it occurs every month. Therefore, we don't make a bracha Hatova Meitiv and Baruch Dayanemis every single month on something like that. V'amar Rav Acha ber Chanina, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Mavarich HaChodesh Bizmano. Anybody who makes the bracha Kiddush HaChodesh at the right time, Kil Mekabel Pnei Shechina. It's as though you have received the Shechina. Ksiv Hachad says HaChodesh Hazeh this month. Ksiv Hasam Zeh Keli V'Anvehu. This is my Hashem, and I will glorify him. From the word zeh is written in both places, so therefore you can say that making a bracha on the Chodesh is the same thing as meeting Hashem. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, we do the moled on Shabbos Nevarch. We didn't obviously do that back in the day, right?
That's correct.
There was no way we would.
They never announced the moled at all, right?
So what did they do back in the day if we did it on after moled?
They watched the witnesses looked up at the sky, saw when the moon was switching over, and went to Beis Din to testify. Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, Ilmale Zachu Yisrael Hakbil Pnei Avin Shebashamayim Kol Chodesh v'Chodesh. If it wasn't for the fact, if the Jewish people would only be able to receive the Shechina from Shemayim one time per month, Dayom, that would be sufficient for them. It's an amazing schus to be able to be at least for that. Amar Abaye says Hilkach Nimrinhu Me'umad. Therefore, we say Kiddush HaChodesh standing up because we're receiving the Shechina. Maremar Marzutra Mekasve Umebarchi. Maremar and Marzutra, so they would hold each other up. They would lean against each other because they were elderly, and so they had trouble standing. So they would be able to help each other stand up, so that they could be able to. That's what it sounds like. Yeah, they lean on each other's shoulders. Amar Rav Acha Ravashi. Rav Acha said to Ravashi, "B'ma'arava mevarchi baruch mechadesh chadashim." In Eretz Yisrael, they made the bracha, blessed as Hashem, who renews the months. Amar Le, he says, "Hi nashi didanami mevarchi." He says the ladies can say that, right? The Rosh Chodesh is a special yontif for women, and so the ladies can make that bracha. There's nothing else to the bracha, right? We want to have a more substantial bracha for the men to say. Ela kid Rav Yehuda. Rather, the bracha of Kiddush HaChodesh is like Rav Yehuda says. Damar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, Baruch Asher b'ma'amaro bara shechakim. With his speeches, with his sayings, he created the heavenly bodies. Uberuach piv, and with the wind of his mouth, called tzvam, all of the hosts, the stars and the planets. Chokuz man nasan lehem. He gave them a time, and he gave them some laws. Shelo yishanu es tafkidam, so they would not change their purpose and their jobs. Sasu musmechem lasos ritzon konam. They are joyous and happy to do the service of Hashem. Poale emes. They are truthful workers. Shepu lason emes. Their job is truth. V'la lavana amar, and to the moon he said, shetis chadesh ateres tiferes lemu'ute vatin, that you should renew the glory to lemu'ute vatin is a way of calling Kahal Yisrael, right? That they were special to Hashem from when they were born. Sheina sinim lehischadesh kamosa, because the Jews are also going to be renewed, just like the moon. Fa'er liyotzram, and to glorify their Creator. Al shem kavod malchuso, in the name of the glory of His kingdom. Baruch atah Hashem mechadesh chadashim. So that all that sounds pretty familiar, right? So that's a bracha that we would say. Ki betachbulos ta'aseh lach milchama. Then the next phrase that we were going to be discussing, and this is a pasuk in Mishlei.
it's on wars.
Right? It says "B'tachbulos tasolach milchama," with the ones who are laden with mitzvos. You are going to go to war. Amar Reb Acha bar Chanina, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, "Mi atamotzi milchamta shel Torah." Who should you bring into the wars of Torah? B'mi sheyesh biyodo chavilos shel Mishnah. Somebody who's carrying bundles of Mishnayos with him. Right? If you're going to come in, you got to know a little bit of your background. So Kari Rav Yosef Anafshei, V'Rav Tavuos Bekoach Shur. So Rav Yosef called about himself. He used the pasuk, V'Rav Tavuos Bekoach Shur, that he had much wheat with the strength of an ox. Right. So he was playing on the theme of Yosef, right? Because Yosef is the shore, right. Yosef is the ox. I also think that Yosef also saw himself as the wheat that everybody was bowing down to. So I think the two of them are plays on the words that he was commenting, that he had much knowledge that he was bringing into the Torah fight. Echad Omer b'shtei shos. Now back to our Mishnah. If one of them said that the event occurred 2 hours into the day, and one said 3 hours into the day, we said that one of the opinions said that is we said that testimony stands, right? Because that's not a big enough of a mistake. But if it was 2 hours in between, then that could have been a big enough mistake. And Rabbi Yehuda even said no, not until he makes a mistake between 5 and 7 hours, right? If
you made a mistake, can you get punished for that?
No, but your testimony is invalid. Right, and then we cannot, because it's Edushiya to Yochol Hazima, because you're giving the wrong hours, so nobody can come and say that you were with us at that time. So Amar Rav Shimi bar Ashi, Rav Shimi bar Ashi says, Lo shanu elo shos. Echad omer kodem hanetzachama v'echad omer lachar netzachama edusam b'tela. This is when they're talking about time. But if one says that it happened before sunrise and one said it happened after sunrise, that's going to invalidate their testimony, because that's too clear a distinction. Pshita, that seems pretty obvious. Ella, echad omer kodem hanetz v'echad omer b'toch hanetz. Rather, the circumstance, somebody says before netz, one says during netz. So hanami pshita, that also seems obvious. You could tell the difference between those times by looking at how bright the sky is. No, Ma'uditim, what you thought? Ha bigiluya kai v'zeharuri bi'almahu dechaza. So you might think that he's standing where he's watching the light come over the horizon, and all he's seeing is he's not actually seeing sunrise. The guy thinks he's witnessing sunrise, but all he's seeing is the first rays of light coming over the horizon, and he's standing out in the open. That's what he says. He's out in the open, and he sees the light shining over the horizon. He thinks it's sunrise, and that's the mistake he's making. Kamash Malan, no, people don't make a mistake. They know when sunrise is. Okay, then we bring the second witness in. So also hayom. So then, if one person comes and says that he's got has something to be able to say to defend the person, so then we put him up by the judges for that day. So what do you mean for that day? If it's too low, we don't leave him up by the judges for any longer than that day. V'atanya, we learn in Brisa, and yesh mamash bedvarav. If this guy has a claim to make in order to protect the person, so lo haya yored misham liolam, we never let him down. He was there forever. Now, that doesn't mean he's one of the judges, because you only have 23 judges, but they promoted him to a special seat where I guess he had the ability to give ideas. V'im ein mamash bedarav, if he has nothing, if there's not much to what he says, ein yored kol yom kulo, then we let him stay up there all day. Why? Kedei shelo tehaliyah so yirida lo, so that he's not embarrassed, right? Because they're going to call him up, they'll say, what do you got to say? And then they're going to say, yeah, that's a dumb answer. And then they'll sit him down, and he'll be embarrassed. So therefore, we let him stay up the whole day.
Regardless. Like a Eureka, like that he's. Oh, I guess. Okay, fine.
Right. We don't. He's going to be embarrassed. It's Eureka, exactly.
Of course, did they have coffee to help him stay up back in the day, or did they work?
It's a good question. I don't think coffee was a big thing back then. I don't think that was the thing. Amar Abaye says Tirguma im ein mamish bedvarav. Yeah, we have to explain our Mishnah that says that he stays up for the whole day as the circumstance where he doesn't say anything important. If he does say something important, then they're going to leave him up. If he has nothing important to say, then we at least leave him up for the day. Okay, next. Matz olos chus. So then, if we find him, we find something that lets him off the hook, so then patruhu, then we're gonna let him. We're gonna end the case, right? That's enough. They found something. Nobody thinks he's guilty, so we let him off that day. So, and then we said they couldn't drink wine all night, but if not, then they had to wait overnight. They were supposed to not drink a lot of wine. So the question is, yayin my time alo. Why couldn't they drink wine? Right? Forget the coffee. Right? Couldn't drink wine. So Amar Rabbi Acha bar Chanina Amar Kra. The pasuk says, the la roznim I shachar ha'oskim berozel she'olam al yishtakru, right? The way that you interpret this pasuk is those that are dealing with the secrets of the universe, meaning if you're really having to have an important conversation, should not get drunk. Don't become intoxicated. Take your deliberations seriously. Okay, next. Lo ra'u mai. So then the next part is they are when we've got everybody up there, we've got we if we had the case and we didn't have a conclusion and they were stuck in a draw, so we kept adding 2 people till we got all the way up to 71. Then they kept arguing until they convinced somebody to switch sides. That's what it says. So now the question is, lo ra'u mai. What if nobody switches sides? What if they're arguing and they're deadlocked and nobody wants to change their opinions? So Meravacha potrin also. And if that happens, then the guy's off the hook, right? We can't find him liable because we don't have enough people for the vote, so therefore we're going to let him off the hook. Rabbi Yochanan says potrin also, we're going to exempt him. So Rav Papa la'abaye v'lifter mikora. So then why do we bother going through the deliberation in order to try to convince somebody to change their mind? If we were going to let him off the hook anyway, just let him off the hook. So Rabbi Yochanan, this is what Rabbi Yochanan said, nobody wants to leave Beis Din confused. It's better that they should say, we argued it out, we came to a clarity, and that was our position, and we let him go, right? Rather, like, okay, we got stuck, so we let him go. So Ikadamri, those say Rav Papa Labai, that Rav Papa said to Abaye, V'lamali Yosifu, why are we adding on these extra judges? Lifterei, mi beidina kamo, why don't we just exempt him? Once you get the first court that doesn't come to a conclusion, the first 23, so let him go. So Rav Yossi, Kai Kavasech, so he says Rav Yossi agrees with what you said, Detanya, as we're going to price Rav Yossi, Rav Yossi says, Kishem shein mosifin al Beis Din shel shivim vecha, just like we don't add anybody to 71 judges, Kachein mosifin al Beis Din shel esrim ushlosha, so too Rav Yossi says, we don't add to the 23 either. So if they're deadlocked at 23, we just exempt him. Tanar Rabbanan, Omrim bedini mamnis. When it comes to financial cases, we say nizdakin ha-din, ve'in omrin bedini mafashos nizdakin ha-din. We don't pronounce this phrase. The judgment has gotten old, right? But when it comes to din nefashos, we don't say it. By mumnus, we do say that. So the question is, what does that phrase mean? My nizdakin hadin. What does it mean? That the phrase has become elder. The court case has become elderly. Elema kosh dina. If it means that the case is difficult. So ipchami boile. So then the opposite should be the case, right? We should be able to say by dini nefashos, right? That the case we're working hard at it. We're going to keep at it. It's become complicated. But when it comes to Dinim Ominous, it's much more straightforward. So Rav Huna Bar Manoch Mishmei Rav Acha Brei Rav Ika Epoch. So you're right. So you're going to flip it, right? We're going to say Nizdaki Nadin when it comes to capital cases, but not when it comes to financial cases. Ravashi Amar Ravashi says, no, Liolam Lo Tepach. Leave it the way that it was. I'll tell you what my Nizdaki Nadin. What does Nizdaki Nadin mean? Chacham Dina. That it was a wise court case. Meaning, at the end of the case, we praise ourselves and say, we judged that well, right? You could say that when it comes to financial cases. We don't say that when it comes to capital cases. So, Meisvei. But we have a question. Godol Shebadayan and Omer Nizdakin Adin, the leader of the court makes this statement that the judgment has become Nizdakin. Now, if it means Iyamar Bishlam Chacham Dina, I understand if they're telling you and making a pronouncement, this was a wise case. Amar Godol, that's why the leader of the Beis Din should be the one who says it, right? He's saying we have judged this well, and I'm complimenting my co-judges, we've all judged this really well. We've done a good job. Amart kash dino, to say it's difficult. Lo sagi de lo amar godol kesufihud kamichsaf nafshe. He says, why should we have the leader be the one who says it? He's going to embarrass himself. He's going to say, it got too hard. We couldn't do it. Couldn't come to a good conclusion. So if we're willing to say that we couldn't come to a good conclusion, he's the leader of the Beis Din. He's getting up, admitting his own deficiency. So the answer is, yeah, you're right. That's exactly what we do, because ein doma misbayish miatzmo lemishbayis mecherim. A person's less embarrassed when he's making a statement about himself than when he's making a statement when somebody else makes it about him, right? If he has to say, I couldn't figure it out, that doesn't hurt as much as somebody saying you couldn't figure
it out.
You couldn't figure it out. Exactly. Ikadamri, those who say, Iyamar Bishlam Kashdina, if you're going to explain it as the word Kashdina, that it was difficult. So Hainu Deina Doma Misbayish Meatzmo Limisbayish Meachirim. So then I do understand why the leader of the base is the one who says it, because it is easier for the person to be able to be self-depreciating and admit that he didn't know it. El Iyamar Chacham Dina. If he was making this, but if the statement means that it was a wise case, so Godol Ishbuchi Mishabech Nafshe, why is the biggest guy in the basin getting up and saying, we did an amazing job, we did. I'm so smart, right? He's praising himself. That doesn't sound right. Vaksiv, the pasuk says, Yalel Chazar v'lo picha, some stranger should be praising you, not your own mouth. You don't give yourself compliments. So the answer is Shani Milsa de Beidina. That's different when it comes to a court declaration. Da Godol Ramya, it's the leader of the court's responsibility to make pronunciations on behalf of the court. So therefore, he does have to be able to make that statement. He's not praising himself. That's just saying the court has ruled and is final, because he has the responsibility of making that statement. And it's not, as we learned in a Mishnah, Gamru es hadavar, when they complete the court case, Hayom Machnis, and also Osan, they would bring them all together. Godol Shebedayanin, the leader of the judges, would say, Ish Ploniat Hazaka, Ish Ploniat Hachayev, you are the one who wins the case, you are the one who loses the case. The leader of the court has that responsibility. That concludes the fifth parak. Hadranach Hayubotkin, Hadranach Hayubotkin, Hadranach Hayubotkin. We move to the sixth parak, right on time for everybody.
That was a short parak.
It was a very short parak, yeah. All of them are pretty quick, but
Can I get one of those? Can I use this?
you grab one. Yep. We're on 42. B. Top. Very top. Nigmar Hadin. Court case is done. Botzino Solusoklo. Let's imagine that we're dealing in a case that was a death sentence case. And the death sentence we're talking about is skila. So we're going to take him out in order to give him skila. Beis ha-skila hayachutz lebeis din. The place where they gave skila was not in the court. It was outside of the court. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, hotzeis hamakalel. There's two places where we find somebody in the Torah getting skila, right? We have the Mekalel, somebody who blasphemes. There was a person who was Mekalel who blasphemes against Hashem, and then there's the Mekoshesh Eitzim who gathers the sticks, and he also is Mechal Shabbos, he gets skila. So we're going to just keep that in mind, that there are two cases where it says they take him out in order to give him stoning.
Ben Soramar as well as skila. I think it's skila.
If it is, that's true, but we don't give the details of how they actually performed skila because that didn't occur, right? So now it says they take him out. So therefore, it's not in Beis Din. They had to take him out. Echad Omar al Pesach Beis Din. So one person would stand by the door of the Beis Din, v'asudorin biyado, and he would hold like a flag in his hand. V'sus rachok mimenu, and then there would be a guy on a horse who was far away, kadeshi ra'ohu, but he was still visible to the guy by the court. Omer echad yeshli l'lamed alav zchus. If somebody comes to the court and says, I have something that I can say to defend this guy, hala menif besudrin, then the guy by the court would wave the flag, v'asus rats, and the guy on the horse would take off and go try to catch the guy before they killed him, right? So, va'afilu hu omer yeshli lamed alai al atzmi zechus. Even if the guy who's being taken out for murder to get killed himself says, I have something to say about myself, machzirun, so we're going to bring him back. Afilu arba v'chamesh pam, even 4 or 5 times. Ubavad sheyesh mamash bedvar, as long as his claim has actual meaning and substance to it, right? If he just keeps making stuff up, right, in order to be able to avoid getting the death sentence, we don't listen to him after a while.
How do you determine that? Like
good question. Gemara's going to ask.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. Says the Gemara. Now, the Mishnah says that the place where they got skila was outside of Beis Din. What does that mean? Like it was next door, just outside the door? Like, isn't it further away? Shouldn't it be outside the city or wherever it was? V'hatanya, we learn in Brisa, Beis HaSkila hayachutz l'sholosh machanos. The Beis HaSkila was outside of the 3 camps. Why 3 camps? Because in the desert, they camped like this. They had the Mishkan here. That was the Machane Leviyah. That was the Machane Shechina. That's where the Shechina was. And then the Leviim camped in this area around it, with Moshe Rabbeinu on this side, right? And the Leviim were around that side. That was the Machane Leviyah. And then Bnei Yisrael camped in groups on each side. That was the Machane Yisrael that camped on their sides. Okay, so that's Machane Yisrael. So this is Camp 1, Camp 2, and Camp 3. So the where they gave skila was outside of camp 1, 2, and 3, all the way on the outside.
Just remind me what 1 and 3 were again. One was
the Mishkan, the Shechina.
Right.
2 is where the Levium are, and 3 is where Bnei Yisrael lived.
So Kohanim, Levium.
But except that Aaron and Moshe lived on this side. So in the Machane Levia.
What's before?
This is why this is the Machane Shechina. Kahas, Gershon, Kahas, and Merari were on this side. Gershon, Kahas, and Merari.
Is this before Aaron became a Kohen?
This was after Aaron, even after Aaron became a Kohen. He lived near Moshe, right? On the east side of the by the opening of the Olam Moed. East side? Yeah, I think so. Okay. Now, that translates over to in modern times, well, not modern times, but in times of Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash, the area of the Azora itself was the Machane Shechina, the Temple Mount area was the Machane Levia, and the whole city of Yerushalayim was Machane Yisrael. So when we say we have to go outside of the 3 camps in order to give the guy stoning, it means outside of the city of Yerushalayim in order to stone him. Okay? So that's what we're suggesting. So he says, "Kirakamart, you're right. V'hoda katani hacha nafka mina di'inafik beidina v'yosef chutz l'shlosh machanos avdina beis askila chutz lebeistin." So you're right, but the point Armish is trying to make is if the court happened to be sitting, right, because we can have courts, not only, these are the courts of 23, didn't have to be in the Sanhedrin area, if this court happened to be outside of the city walls anyway, nevertheless, you couldn't do the execution in the court anyway. You had to leave the court besides.
Because we learned that you can't go from one court to the next court.
That is true. You cannot run from one court to the next court. But the reason why is you cannot, because we're going to see we don't want the Beis Din to look like they are murderers.
Are we talking specifically about the Sanhedrin?
No. Any court of 23. Because the court of Sanhedrin couldn't leave the Lishkas HaGosis, the chamber that was right next to the Beis HaMikdash.
I thought they only conducted capital cases in the Sanhedrin.
No, so you can cut any place that has a court of 23. They had ones in most of the major cities. They had 2 additional court. They had the Sanhedrin was in the Lishkas HaGosis, and then they had 2 courts of 23 also in the Beis HaMikdash, which was hearing capital cases. And they had this capital courts on the in the major cities. The thing is that those courts only had jurisdiction as long as the Sanhedrin was in their chamber. So therefore, while what you probably had heard is only you can judge it while there's a Sanhedrin. That means when the Sanhedrin exists in the Lishkas HaGosis, then these other courts of 23 can judge cases of Dinei Nefashos. Right. Okay. So now. Or also, we also want to give the guy a chance to get saved, right? Because we want to give somebody can come up and say, "Hey, they make an announcement. We're going to kill this guy," and we want to give somebody an opportunity to say, "Hey, wait, I have an idea to save him." Minani Mili. So where do we know?
You needed transportation with him from
one
to
be able to get
also
up.
people would see him and be like, "Hey,
that's
guy
correct.
Is such a great." You're hoping for all these.
You're hoping for somebody to stand up. So Minani Mili. What is the source for the fact that they had to have the execution location outside of the 3 camps? To Tanur Rabbanan, Rabbi's word. They took the one who blasphemed against Hashem outside of the camp. Chutz legimel machanos. That means they took him outside of the 3 camps. Atomer chutz legimel machanos. Chutz lemachane achas. How do you know? You read the pasuk. The pasuk says they took him outside of the camp. So how do you know that's 3 camps? It should only be 1 camp. Nemar kan michutz lemachane v'nemar beparan nisrafin chutz lemachane. It says of outside the camp. Both here when it comes to the person who's getting executed, and also when it comes to the bulls that were burned offerings, the parhel and davar. We had the circumstance where a Beis Din would rule on a case incorrectly, and then they find out that the people followed their ruling, so they have to bring a sin offering on behalf of all the averos that they caused. So the bull is slaughtered inside the Beis HaMikdash, but they burn the bull outside of the city. Right, and also,
why did they burn it outside the city if you could do everything in the Beis Mikdash?
They cannot burn this bull. This bull is specific because it says chutz l'machane. right? They're told that you have to burn it outside the camp. And also the part of the Kohen Gadol has a similar situation. The Kohen Gadol rules on halach and he follows it, so then he brings his bull in this special circumstance outside of the camp. Just like the bull is burnt, it says outside the camp, in those circumstances it means outside of the 3 camps. Here too, when it says outside the camp, it means outside of the 3 camps. And okay, how do you know that those bulls are being burned outside of the camps, outside of the 3 camps? Well, that comes from a brisa. Votzi es kol hapar el michutz lamachaneh. You bring the bull after it was slaughtered already outside of the camp. Chutz l'sholosh machanos. That's outside of the 3 camps. Atomer chutz l'sholosh machanos. You think it means outside of the 3 camps. Or maybe it just says chutz lamachaneh. It's out of 1 camp. Keshomer el michutz lamachaneh bepar ha'eda. Since we have another pasuk, right? One time it's written by the bull that is for the Kohen. One time it's written by the bull that's for the congregation that sinned based on the Sanhedrin telling them that something was permissible. So Shein Talmud Lomar Sharei Kvar Nemar V'Saraf Osokash Yasaraf Es Par Rishon. I wouldn't need to know that it has to be taken outside the camp because the one pasuk by the bull it says you should burn it the same way you did the other one. So the first one told me to take it outside the camp. The second one you don't have to say outside the camp anymore. Therefore, the reason why it says to take it outside the camp the second time is Litain Lo Mach Nishniya. To tell me first, you got to take it outside the camp. Then you say we're going to burn it the same way and take it outside the camp. So that means we're taking outside 2 camps because it's written twice. Okay. Then it says, where are we going to burn it? We're going to take it to the location by on occasion they have to clean off of the mizbeach and they scoop up the ashes and they would bring the ashes outside of the camp. It says they would bring it outside where they burned the bulls' offerings because they would burn these bulls. They would bring the bulls to that area where they were gathering up that ash.
Would he dump the ash in air?
And that, sorry?
How did
They had a location outside the camps. So there it says also outside the camps. But again, it's the same location. So why do you have to tell me again outside the camp? The answer is 3 times it tells me outside the camp to tell me Shein Talmud Lomar Sharei Kvar Nemar al Shvach Hadeshen Yisrof, that you're going to burn this bull where the ashes for the mizbeach is. So Litain Lo Machna Shlishis is to tell me clearly 3 times, right? It told me 3 times outside the camp, outside the camp, outside the camp. Didn't have to tell me it 3 times. Could have told me 1 time, burn it outside the camp, and then tell me the other time, burn this one where you burn the other one, and then burn them where you placed the other ashes. Why is it every single time it has to tell me outside the camp? In order to tell me it's outside of a separate camp. Outside of 1 camp, outside of 2 camps, outside of 3 camps. Okay, so now I'm going to learn outside of 3 camps, and that is going to be the same thing by the person who gets killed in Beis Din. When it says he's taken outside the camp, it also means outside of 3 camps. So now, v'leilich mishchutei chutz. But 1 second. Why are you going to learn that the place where they're executed is outside of the 3 camps? Because you're learning it from these bulls, where these bulls are being burnt. Why don't we learn that there's a prohibition that you're not allowed to slaughter a sacrifice outside of the Beis HaMikdash? And there, outside the Beis HaMikdash means any place outside the Beis HaMikdash, right? Even inside the city of Yerushalayim, or even inside the Temple Mount area, but not in where you're supposed to. That's a violation of shchutei chutz, of sacrificing outside of the appropriate location. Mm-hmm. So why can't we say when it says outside over there, outside the camp, why don't we say outside the camp by the execution? It's the same meaning as outside the camp when it talks to the slaughtering of an offering. Just like by the slaughtering of an offering, you violated the Aveira by only going outside 1 camp. So too, when it comes to the execution, it should take place outside of the 1 camp. So the answer is, it makes more sense to compare the place where they're executed to the bull's ashes being burnt. Why? Shekain hotzi al michutz lamachane machshir mechaper. There are 4 ways to compare that it's similar. Number 1, the word hotzi is used in both of those, in all 3 of in both the cases. Number 2, it says al michutz lamachane. Also in all the cases. Number 3, machshir, that going outside the camp isn't the mitzvah in itself or the avera itself. It's only a setup for doing the actual act that you were going to do. And the third thing is that burning that bull and also the execution are an atonement for averus. So it makes more sense. There are 4 ways that we can compare the execution to the burning of the bull's ashes.
So we could only sacrifice
So the shechting of the court however, adirabba, but the reverse could also be said. Why don't I learn that the place of the execution should only be outside of one camp? Why? Because it's similar to the sacrifice being brought outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because it's comparable also in four ways.
The animal, you do it in the court side of. If it's you only do it outside the courtyard if it's really bad, the virus you did, right?
You're talking about the execution?
Yeah.
Yes. The execution is only for really bad for those virus that you're going to get killed for. Shekain adam chote. First of all, both circumstances by shchutei chutz. There's an avera going on. That's number one. Bid neshama. You're dealing with a human being. Right, both the cases of slaughtering the animal, you're talking about a person doing it and the person getting executed. Whereas by the bull's ashes, you're talking about burning a bull. Pigel. Also, there is a prohibition against sacrificing with having the wrong location in mind, and by the mekala, by the person who is. The rule of pigul by a sacrifice, the rule is by shchutei chutz that you're only liable if the korban is otherwise a kosher korban, right? If you do something like have in mind to slaughter it inappropriately in the wrong time or something like that, so then your korban is invalid. So if you slaughtered an invalid korban in an invalid place, you haven't done an avera. You're only doing an avera if you slaughtered a valid korban in an invalid place.
What about the opposite?
Sorry?
What if it was an invalid korban in an invalid place?
So then you have an avera there also, right? That's also an avera, right?
Not both.
But you can't get both, right? You can't get with both. So therefore, pigul is irrelevant, right? When it comes to the person who is getting skila, and it is also irrelevant when it comes to slaughtering of this animal outside of. Outside, so therefore we see, and also an adam mechote neshama, right? We're talking about somebody who is where you're killing something, right? That was the one I skipped. Neshama was killing something. That the person who is getting skila is getting killed. Also, the one who is slaughtering is also killing the animal. Whereas the bull that they're burning is already shechted before they brought it outside. You're already bringing a dead animal outside to burn. So therefore, you see there's four ways that the execution location is similar to slaughtering outside. So now, which one am I comparing it to? I have four ways of comparing it to each group. So which way did I decide to go? So the answer is machshir mi machshir adifle. So you're right, but the best comparison is the fact that the slaughtering of the animal outside the Beis Hamikdash is the avera. The bringing the person outside of the camp in order to get his execution isn't the actual mitzvah of the execution. Similar also, bringing the bull outside of the camps in order to be burnt is not the actual mitzvah. So therefore, it makes more sense to compare it to the bull, where you're just taking it outside in order to do the mitzvah, to the execution where you're taking the person outside in order to perform the mitzvah. Whereas the slaughtering it outside is the actual avera.
Was part of it also because of the fact that they'd be tummy, and you have to leave the camp when you're tummy. I mean, they're going to become tummy once they.
Well, I don't know if you because you're not actually touching the guy when he's dead.
It's okay. That needs no help.
No, but you're going to be you're going to be. I mean, you have to bury him after.
Well, but also not only that, but there's also no avera of becoming tamei in the city of Yerushalayim, only in the Beis Hamikdash.
Oh, so you mean right?
So even one camp would be sufficient.
Right, but even didn't you have to leave the camp when you were tummy anyways? When you become tummy, you would have to leave the
That's
whole.
Taras. Taras, you have to go outside. Taras, yeah.
Oh, okay, fine.
Rav Papa Amar Moshe Hecha Hava Yosef. So where was Moshe living? Right, where did he live? So he was b'Machane Levia. Right, so he was in this Levi camp, right, in the front area. V'amar le Rachmana. So Hashem said to Moshe. Here's another source, right? He says, Hashem says to Moshe, you've got to take him outside of the camp. So the Shmak Machane Shechina doesn't even enter into it because Moshe wasn't even there. He was already outside in the second camp. So he told him to take him outside of the camp. So we had to take him outside of at least the second camp into the third. They took him outside into the camp. That's what it says again. So when the Torah repeats it, they says they took him out. So that means they took him out of the third camp. So that's how Rav Papa wants to learn it. So he says, yeah, but Haimi Baile Lasia, that pasuk only means that they did it. That only tells me that they did it, meaning they told them to take it out and then they took them out. That's not an extra camp. That's the same camp, right? Told them to do it and they did it. So Asiya behead yaksiva. He says, no, that's not just to do it because that is already explicitly stated. We're on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. Ubnei Yisrael asu kasher tziva Hashem as Moshe. The Bnei Yisrael did what Moshe told them to. El miyata vayirgno so even. They stoned him with a stone. My avdilei. So if that's the truth, so then how do you understand that they then when it says kasher tziva, they did everything Moshe said. So how do you understand the pasuk? What's the point of the pasuk that says, and then they stoned him, right? If that's every one of those psukim is now for extra drasha. What's the extra drasha of the pasuk? And they stoned him. So the answer is there's a brisa. Vayirgbo oso ba'even. They stoned him with a stone. So it means oso v'lo bichsuso. They stoned him, meaning him, but he was not dressed, right? A person gets stoned, he's supposed to not be dressed because that makes it easier for him to die, right? We don't want him to be protected by his clothes in any way. And Evan with a stone, that you don't have to throw many stones. If he dies with the one stone that they throw on him, so then that is sufficient. That's done. Now, one time when it talks about the Mekalel, right, he is taken out and he is stoned with one stone, but the one it says they threw stones at him and he died. The ikas of Rachmana Evan, if it only had used the pasuk, if the pasuk only told me that he threw one stone, I would have thought that they only throw one stone. If the guy lives, he lives. Right? So Kasav Rachmana Avanim, therefore the Torah says stones, meaning he's got to die. So if one stone is sufficient, but if he needs more than one stone, you can throw more than one stone.
Isn't it Avera to throw more if he dies from the first one?
I would think so.
Right?
Yeah.
Overkill.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. But do they check every stone throw? They stop it. They check his vitals.
It's a good question. How they got to send a guy down there, and, right? Because of Rachmana Avanim, if it said with stones, Havamina Meikora, Naisi Tarti, that at first you bring a couple of stones. Because of Rachmana Evans, if the pasuk says one stone. Haitana Nemar Kamar. So. 1 second though, we already had an answer, right? We had first brought the whole drasha of the Hotzi, which was a Gzeir Shava, and then Rav Papa comes and he gives his own drasha how we know that outside of the three camps. So what do you do with the other one? He says the Tan is saying, if I didn't know what Rav Papa was saying, I would have learned it from Gzeir Shava. Ilu lo nemar kamar, hachi kamar. Ilu lo nemar kra. If it weren't for the psukim that said. What Rav Papa just said, that it was outside, that Moshe took him outside of the third camp. So then, Hayisi Omer Gzeir Shava, I would have learned it from Gzeir Shava anyway. Nemar Krog Gzeir Shava Lo Tzarich. But now that I have the pasuk that Rav Papa uses, I don't need the Gzeir Shava of Hotzi. Rav Ashi Amar. So Rav Ashi says, Heicha Hava Yosef. Where was Moshe living? B'machane Levia, he was in the Levi camp. V'amar le'rachmana, the Torah says, Hotzias makal chutz machane. The Torah says, take the one who was blaspheming outside of the camp. That's outside of Machane Levia. El michutz lamachane, to the place outside of the camp. That's chutz lamachane Yisrael. That means they took him outside of the camp of the Israelim. This says it again. V'yotzias makalel, then they took him out. La'asiya, that means that they did it. So asiya behed yaksiv. But 1 second. That's not even necessary because the pasuk says, right? It doesn't say, we were reading the pasuk before, vayotziu es hamekalel, right? El michutz l'machaneh. But it doesn't have to say that. El michutz l'machaneh means he took him out of the camp. Vayotziu es hamekalel is that they did it. So therefore, why do I need, that's written specifically, so why do I need to write it twice? So the answer is, Ubnei Yisrael asu kasher tziva Hashem as Moshe. So why it says already that they did it, because the pasuk says that Bnei Yisrael did everything that Moshe Rabbeinu said. So I've got an extra pasuk here. Hahumi boile. I need that pasuk because chad l'smicha, one to tell me the extra rule that when they are going to stone somebody, everybody has to put their hands on the person. Right? They put their hands on the person, and then they all push him. They push him from a high place. That is how it is done, in order to indicate that our hands are free from murder. We're not murdering anybody. We are just carrying out the death sentence as prescribed. Amrulei Rabbanan, L'Rav Ashi, so Rabbanan said to Rav Ashi, L'didach, Kol Hani Hotzi, Dichsivi, Bepar Manisrafim, Mein Darash Behu. Okay, well then if that's the case, fine. Then we've got all these extra words in the psukim having to do with the cows. We have Hotzi, Al Michutz Machane, and then it says again, Al Michutz Machane. What do you do with all of those, now that you have got all these extras? The answer is Kasha. It's a fair question. I don't have an answer to how to use all those psukim in the end, so fair question.
It's interesting because usually they said like, oh, we have a
Correct.
Gezerah Shava.
Gezerah Shava usually is the best answer.
Right.
Right?
And yeah.
Many
usually they have to
Meforshim.
apply it to something. Like
Many
they don't usually say, oh, we have two, we're okay. It's
Many
usually like-
Meforshim address that issue. I'm not sure I found one that was easy to that I liked so far, so I don't have an answer to it. But that is a question the Meforshim are addressing. When we abandon Gezerah Shava, Gezerah Shava is the best. So Echad Omed, okay. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says one guy standing. Pshitali. Echad Even Sheniskal Bo. Ve'echad Eitz Shenitla Bo. Ve'echad Saif Shenerag Bo. Ve'echad Sudar Shnechlak Bo. Kulon Mishal Tzibor. It seems very clear that the stone that they're going to stone him with, the tree that they're going to hang him on, the sword that they're going to kill him with, the cloth that they're going to strangle the fellow with, in all of these death sentences, those are community property. Right? Why? My timer. You got to pay for your own execution. Right? That's cruel. Right? So clearly the community is going to pay for the execution. Boy Rav Huna asked the following question: what about the guy who stands with the cloth and the horse that they're standing by in order to save him? So Mishal Mihu, who pays for that? Who do we say that since we're trying to save him, he pays for his estate pays for that? Odilma Kevan Debedina since the obligation is on the court in order to rescue the fellow, midid who. So therefore it is the community's responsibility to pay for. V'tu, furthermore, Had Amar Rav Chia Bar Rav Ashi, Amar Rav Kista, Hayotzli Harig, somebody goes out to get killed, Mashkino so Koret Shel Levona Bekoshel Yayin. We give him a drink that had some frankincense mixed with wine. It was intoxicating in order to calm the guy down, make him not so worried about the fact that he's about to get it.
It's like a common drug?
I don't know. I've never had any.
It has to be the community. It doesn't make sense. Otherwise, like the person.
And why did he do that? Kadesh Titarif Dato, in order to make his mind not focus on the death. So Shnemar Tnu Shechar La'oved V'yayin L'mari Nafesh, right? You give something to drink to somebody who is lost, and wine is good for the bitter of the soul. V'tanya, we learn in Brisa, Nashim Yikaroshim Yerushalayim, Hayu Misnadvos Mevios Oson. So the women, the noble women of the city used to donate that. That was their kindness to people who were getting executed. They would donate that beverage. The Lo Hisnadvu, Nashim Yikaros, if the women didn't donate it, Mishal Miha. So who would pay for it? Havada Mistaber, Mishal Tzibor, is clearly the community's obligation to bring it. Kevin Dechsiv, Tenu Mididhu, because it says give it was from the community. But meaning Rav Acha Bar Huna Mirav Sheshas. Rav Acha Bar Huna says to Rav Sheshas, Amar Echad Min Talmidim, when a student says, Yeshli Lamed Alav Schus, I've got a good idea that can get this guy off the hook. Vinishtatek. And then he dies. So, Mahu, what is the halacha in that circumstance? Minafeach Rav Sheshis biyadei. So he just blew into his hands. Like, that's a silly question. That's like meaningless. Nishtatek, if you're going to worry about the guy who died, he's got nothing to say. So afila echad besof olam nami. So then you say, well, there could be. I'm worried about what he was going to say. Somebody in some other country, foreign country, might have a good answer. What are you going to say? You can't ever execute anybody because somebody somewhere has something to say. So Hasam Lo Kamar, that we don't say. So Achi Kamar, so he says this here he says there we're not going to say that because that's just theoretical. But here somebody came forward and says I got something to say. So it is a good question. So Toshma coming with number of Yosi Bar Chanina. Rabbi Chanina says Echad Min Talmidim. One of the students comes Zicha Umeis, right? So he comes along and he's got an idea about how to get him off, and then he dies. Rono Soki Luchai. We imagine like he's alive, ve'omed bimkomo. And then we stand in his place. We basically are going to count that as an argument in his favor. So zicha in, lo zicha, so lo, right? He says if he has something to defend, so then great, and if he's not. So pshita, li amar tiboilach. So he says, it's clear to me that that this could have been a good question. Meaning, one second, Kilchan Omeid. So you're right. Zicha Pshitali. So what he was saying is that if he has it, if he says something that's going to be able to get him off the hook, so then then he can actually stand and give his answer. But Omar, but if he just says it, but he doesn't actually say what his claim is, then tiboilach. That is a question. In other words, we can't answer that based on what we say. Where the student says, Zicha, that I have an answer, then he gives his answer, then we can listen to his answer. But if all he does is say that he has an answer, and we don't ever hear what the answer is, there's nothing from the Mishnah that proves that we're going to listen to him. Okay, so now, sorry I'm rushing, but I want to be able to make sure I get to something at the end. Now we had the question, Afilu hu, now he said, even if he himself says, I've got something to say, so he wanted to know how many times we bring him back. So the answer is, even the first time, even the second time. We don't care what he has to say, we're going to bring him right back. Right? He says, I have an idea, bring him back. Vatanya, but don't we have an abraisa? It doesn't matter whether he has something of substance to say. It doesn't matter if he doesn't have any substance to say. So we bring him back to court. After 2 times, so then you have to hear what his claim is. Then you have to see, does he have something to say or not? If he has nothing to say, so we don't bring him back. Amar of Papa. So Rav Papa explained, Tirguma mipam shniya ve'elech. So from the second time on, we say, okay, what do you have to say before we take him back?
So by the third time we know, and then he's...
So minono yadi, so your question was, so how do you know if it's a good thing he has to say? Right? He says, I have something to say. So what do? So Amar Abaye says, Demasrinan lezuga derabanan. We dispatch a couple of rabbis with him. Right? Their job is to hear what he has to say, and then if it says, they judge whether it's valuable or not. So if there's something valuable to what he has to say, so then you can bring him back. Lo, but if he's got nothing to say, don't bring him back. So why don't you send the rabbis with him in the first place? Why do you bring him back automatically when he's got the first time or the second time? So the answer is, agav de bois, since he's afraid, he maybe can't put his words together. So lo matzi amar kol mai deisle, he won't be able to say anything anyway. So there's no point. So as soon as he says, I got something to say, we bring him back to the court, let him get settled, give him a chance.
And then hear what he has to say.
And then hear what he has to say.
Oh,
by the time we do it the third time, we're like, okay.
You know what's
right.
going on. Okay.
No, but wait. So you're telling me
We're going to do the Mishnah, and I want to be able to make sure I
you
get
want
to
to do
it.
the
Yeah.
Mishnah?
I do the Mishnah.
Fine.
Yeah, I don't want to stop yet. If I can. Says the Mishnah, Matzuz los chus patruhu. So if they find a meritorious, so then he's off the hook. V'im lav, if not, yotzi lisakel, he goes out to get the skila. Uchruz yotzi lefanav, if they had a guy announcing in front of him, ish ploni ben ploni yotzi lisakel, so and so is going to get stoned. Al sha'avar avera ploni plonis, because he did such and such an avera. Ploni edov, and these are his witnesses. Kol mi she'odelos chus yavod v'yilamed alav. Anybody who has something to say, please come and testify for him. Amar Abaye says v'tzarich l'meimer b'yom ploni. You have to actually give everybody all that they need in order to make these guys edom zomim, in order to save him. So you got to announce also that these guys testified that it happened on this day, b'shah plonis, at this time, u'b'makom ploni, in this place. Maybe there's somebody who knows that these witnesses were not valid, and they will do hazama on them. Uchruz yotzi lefanav, they had a guy who would make the announcements. Lefanav in may kara lo, he would go in front of him, but not behind him. Now, this is what I wanted to get to. So, this Gemara's got a little bit of extra space on the bottom. The Gemaras are missing a whole piece of Gemara that we're going to learn right now. And the censors took it out. So why? Because in the 1300s or so, the church, there was a fellow Donin who was a Jew who converted to Christianity, started to raise the issue that the Talmud is very anti-Christian.
Are you talking about Yeshka?
I am talking about later than Yoshka, right, in the 1300s, right? So they decided that the Gemara is very anti-Christian, and that's why...
Someone went in, right, and was able to memorize everything and copied off.
So there are lots of Sfarim, right? There was a Ritva that came out on Baba Basra that when I was in yeshiva, that somebody had memorized that they would, that they say that the Vatican would confiscate various manuscripts and things. But this is the Gemara itself, and so they would censor. And not only would the Christians censor, but the Jews themselves would censor because they didn't want their copies of the Gemara that they were writing, because remember, in the 1300s they were handwriting. 1480 with the printing press, they still didn't want their investment to be ruined. They would have to get their everything confiscated, so they would remove things that were anti-Christianity. Therefore, this section of the Gemara was removed from the actual Gemaras. The text was saved and preserved in other locations because they knew that they were taking it out. So this is likely self-preserved.
Was it only in this Masechta or all Masechtas?
So it's in many Masechtos, but it's not common, right? Where you see how many times that these things are mentioned.
Is that how, do we just know it somewhere else?
Somewhere else, yeah. So the Oz, the Gemara, this Gemara, these new Gemaras, and Nagos V'Tzionim, I don't think it's in the art scroll, has Nagos V'Tzionim, the whole story here. So we'll read this piece of Gemara. Okay?
Read the notes. Maybe
It says like this: they had somebody go out and announce Lefon of in me karalos. We said that we go in front of him, but we don't have a responsibility to go and make an announcement 40 days before we execute him, right? We don't have to, like normally when we have an auction or something like that, we have to make public announcement to make everybody come. So we're only going out right as the guy's getting executed in order to make an announcement in case, why don't we have a 40-day announcement period? Does anybody know anything? Put up signs, whatever. We don't do that. So V'atanya, but we have a brisa that says like this: Be'erev HaPesach tolahu liyesho hanotzri. On Erev Pesach, they hung Yesho the Christian, from the Yetzu from Nazareth. Okay, V'akaros yotzi lefanov arba'im yom, and they announced that he was going to be executed 40 days before he was being executed. Yeshu HaNotzri, Jesus of Nazareth, or Yeshu from Notzar, was getting executed. Yotze Lisakel, he's going to be stoned. Al Shekishef, because he performed magic. He did kishuf, right? Black magic. Vehesich, and he convinced people to worship Avodah Zarah. V'diachas Yisrael, and he made the Jewish people sin. Call Mishi Yodeluz Chus, anybody who has something meritorious to say to save him. So V'yilam Eidarav should come forward and say it so that we can save him. V'lo Matzulos Chus, they couldn't find anybody who would speak on his behalf. V'chlohu Berev Shabbos, and they hung him up on Berev Pesach, and they hung him on Erev Pesach. Amar Ula says, V'tispera Yeshu HaNotzri bar Apuche Zchushu, says, I don't understand. Why would they have tried to get Yeshu off the hook? Right? After all, Mesisu, he was trying to get people to worship Avodah Zarah. So that we know is one of those averos that we don't try to get people off the hook for. The Rahman Amar Pasuk says, Lo sachmov, lo sechasalav. That when it comes to people trying to get other people to worship Avodah Zarah, that is not an avera that we protect people from.
And
so why were they?
We accept negative testimony. You're allowed, right? We're allowed to revert to a negative testimony.
That's correct.
Right.
Ella, Shani Yeshu HaNotzri, Yeshu was different because the Karv L'Malchus Hava, he had friends in the government. So who had friends of his in the government? So because if you look at Christian sources, he was not well liked by the Roman authorities either. So he had somebody, who was it? Plisto? No, he was. He was. He brings here who it was. I'll find in a second. Let's both finish up the Gemara and then we'll go back. So, Tanar Rabbanan, our rabbis learned, Chamisha, tell me how you Yeshu. The Yeshu had 5 disciples, which doesn't match any of the he had 12 or 4 or whoever they had, but he doesn't have. They had 5 disciples. The Eluhain. This says 5, right? Whatever that means. Whether this is the next question to be able to ask is this Yeshu the same one? Right? Because remember, here we have a problem, right? Yeshu HaNotzri, right? So this is problematic because there's a Yeshu that's also Yeshu HaNotzri, who is the student of Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya in Maseches Sota. But that one doesn't live at the same time as Jesus would need to be alive. So it doesn't match that it's the same one. There's no way to tell that this is the same one either. But a couple of the names in this Gemara do make some sense. Because they say, they brought in his disciples. They were Eluhain. Masai, Nakai, Netzer, Uboni, Vesoda. So if you're familiar with some Christianity, Masai is Matthew, right? And the ones who don't know, Toda, Thaddeus, right? There's another one that's there. So there's a couple that are there. So they brought them in. Amar Lahu, so they said, Matai Yahareg, right? You're supposed to die, Matai. So he says, Haksiv, you can't, because the pasuk says, Matai Avover, Pnei Elokim. Matai is going to come, I will come. They have play on words from Sukkim in order to indicate that God was really prophesizing about them, that they were going to live. So he says that Matai will come, and I will see the face of God. So they Amrulo, so they answered him back, no, we're supposed to die because Matai Yareg, because the pasuk says Matai Yamus ve'avad Shmo, right? Matai will die and his name will be destroyed, but Matai means when, right? But again, they're using the play on words. Your own logic that if you find the word Matai in the psukim, then you can play the game and pretend it talks about you. So then we're going to do the same game, and they do it for each one. Asyu Nakai, they brought Nakai Amar Lahu Nakai Yehareg. Nakai, you're supposed to get death, and he says, how can you? V'Naki v'Tzadik al Tarog. Naki, and a righteous person you shouldn't kill. Amrulo, they said to him, we can because Nakai Yareg, because the pasuk says, Bemistarim Yarog Naki. In the secrets, Naki will get killed. Asiu lenetzar, the burn netzar, marlahu netzar yareg, and he says v'netzar mishar shav yifra, that netzar will, from his roots will blossom out. So Amrulay, they said to him, you're supposed to get killed because netzar yareg. The pasuk says v'ata shlachta mikivrecha kenetzar nis of, that you will be thrown to the crypt, to your tomb, like netzar. Asiu leboni, they brought him boni. Amar lahu, they said to him boni yareg, beni bechori Yisrael. He said no, because boni is the firstborn of Israel, so he's special. He doesn't get killed. So Amrullah, they said, you do get killed because the pasuk says, "Hine anochi horeg es bidcha bechorecha." I'm killing your firstborn son. That's by Paro. So again, just play on words. Asiu letoda, they brought in Toda. Amar lahu Toda yareg haksiv mizmor letoda. He says, but there's a song of praises to Toda. He says, Toda will be honored. So therefore, this is the Gemara. We will stop here at the top of Mem Gemara.